If Zizek were Siegfried, there would be a point where the dragon's blood didn't cover him, and it's all protecting power. And at that point, we're calling the Socratic Slip of Zizek. We can link that directly to our theme of liberalism, this ongoing investigation of what this term means. What's the talk all about? So some of the talk is about universalism. Liberalism is supposed to have laws which are not arbitrary, so not just the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain shouting at people and deciding whatever he wants to do, but predictable. And they're supposed to be predictable and universal. Universal, everyone is under the law in the same way. Of course, that's always immediately challenged by that principle is always immediately challenged by the reality, as in the well-known saying of Anatole France about the poor and the rich being equally forbidden to sleep under the awnings of movie theaters and to urinate in the street or whatever it may be, or to beg. There's still laws against quote-unquote aggressive panhandling, and there's still, I think in quite a few communities, there's almost no panhandling because the police will still discourage that. And Zizek clings to liberalism in this sense, in the universality and in, but does he also cling to it in the predictability? That's another, that's a big factor. Recently we've got AI judges, artificial intelligence judges handling cases, real cases in Estonia. So we're in this end times. I suppose Dugan would even say in the satanic times, possibly. And we're threatened with all kinds of funny things. Don't be too worried that they're handling only right now small claims cases under 8,000 euro, I think. Although 8,000 euro is enough to break quite a few people. So we don't know how the future is going to go with that. But this has to do with what we were saying before, with Zizek wants a final settlement on universal norms of some kind. So the norm links to Socrates, and that Socrates tries to find norms, and he tries to find something which is present, which can act as a controlling authority. But in what way does he do it? So if you regard what he's trying to discover as something which is like an epistemic rule which can be applied to the world, like they're two different things, then you're in a kind of modern way of looking at it. So I wanted to try to approach this so-called Socratic slip through a more Heideggerian, get some more Heideggerian leverage on it if possible. There's a comment in a video on architecture with Sanford Quitner and Marika Trotter, where Quitner brings up this example. Apparently, they kind of move sometimes in the space of Graham Harman and the OOO, and they touch on things which somehow, although Graham Harman isn't really analytic philosophy, he seems to be in many ways somehow. They sometimes move in that space, and the space where, of course, we have this quote-unquote Chalmers and the quote-unquote hard problem of consciousness and the zombie problem. So apparently Quitner, in order to attack the zombie, Quitner is informed of all kinds of the latest gossip and so forth, in these circles, brings out this example of somebody's robe comes open, they're exposed, somebody else blushes. So this is supposed to be, somehow he doesn't go into the rationale behind it, but somehow this is supposed to be a sign of that they're not a zombie, which doesn't work. But why doesn't it work? So, like the same example shows up in more or less in the Republic with Polemarchus, right? So Polemarchus gets caught in a contradiction, and then supposedly he blushes. Maybe it's not a blush. Maybe he was red with anger, which I think maybe is probably um, that sounds to be right to me actually. But the whole tradition thinks of it as a blush. Um, but in any case, this is meant to be a sign that the what belongs to the intellect or the spirit, which is this notion of contradiction, which Socrates brings out in the simplest way of saying you have to remember what you said. So it's as though he's priming a prototype of something that's been said in the past of memory. He's even, in a way, priming people to be Sukarion or um, midget souls who live in their memory in this sense, so far as the memory is here identified with the ultimate knowledge, with the truth of how to act, um, which is taken for granted to be tailored to human beings. The world is taken to granted to be tailored to human beings, so therefore truth is taken for granted to be something good, not the terrible truth, as Nietzsche said. So we still have this taking for granted to be that the truth will be good in a certain way in Zizek, right? This is still the liberal project so far as it doesn't accept, for instance, there's a turn from what we were discussing before with with Burke, where when Burke is read by Carl Schmitt says, Burke says clearly we cannot have deliberation in any serious sense in a liberal parliament. And that would go the same for the American system with the mutandis, the necessary changes made. So what he's saying is instead what you have is this fierce polemical contests, and they're contests of interest, and they're real contests, and they ultimately link to the physical possibility of killing. So as long as we're dealing with the physical possibility of killing, then it's a no hold bars situation, and it's not deliberation in this neither in the Aristotelian sense of boule or in the, but what matters more for Schmitt, I think, is in this French sense, in this sense of enlightenment, in the sense of basically it could be boiled down to you correct me in some issue, and I thank you because I've been corrected and now I see the light. So that doesn't happen too much in regular discussions, you will notice. It happens sometimes in classrooms where, in fact, in the law schools, there's this bastardized use of the, in America anyway, there's a bastardized use of the word Socratic method, which somehow goes along with the law school professors' other weapons, as it were, against the student. You know, sometimes the law school professor will say something to the student like, did you get enough sleep last night? Maybe, you know, he has certain rhetorical tools to use against the students, because probably in most classes there's going to be a couple of students that are smarter than the professor, right? So one of them is this idea of the Socratic method, which when you look at it, it's actually a way of brainwashing, because you get the person to help in their own brainwashing, the way they use it. You suggest something and then you kind of say, now what's the rest of that? You try to lead them to it, and then they supposedly find it on their own. You can say the original, this is how often even the Meno example is read this way in some sense, although I don't believe in the Socratic sense this is correct. In the Socratic sense, what he shows is that there's something in the mind already, and that it can on its own make certain recognitions. And so think of, to make this more tangible, let's think of an example. I think it's from the Timaeus, maybe, but it doesn't matter. It's an example where Socrates asks, how is it possible that there can be an error in knowledge, in the sense that think of a time when you saw somebody that you hadn't seen in many years, and then you recognize them, knowledge in this sense. So here, what Heidegger is saying is, with the Greeks, there's no subject object, in the sense that the knowledge the recognition is happening just as much in the world, or you wouldn't even use the word world in this context. It's happening just as much amidst the things or the beings as is the thing being known. It's not a matter of a mind knowing, and neither is it even a matter of the suke as something analogous to a mind knowing. It's something that happens in the world. But the problem then is that the manner of knowing has one correct setting. So you actually recognize that person that you haven't seen in 10 years or whatever, and it's correct. The recognition is, you got it right with the prototype matches, but it's only a manner of speaking that we say you. The you doesn't refer to sort of a testy ego, which is out of tune with itself and worried about its financial situation, or an AI computer ruling against it for 8,000 euro or whatever. The you is just a word which is not so much problematic with the Greeks. But the basic thing here is that I want to point to is that they think that there's one correct solution, right? So it's hard to see, but we see that there can be an error in that space, right? You can get a recognition wrong somehow. How can there be an error? How can you think somebody is somebody that they're not if you know who they are? So this is something happening outside. It's not just a question about statements, which have been logically interpreted as formal statements, which are then we can search within them for some kind of fallacy, for somewhere where we went wrong. In the same way, Zizek is still pushing for a final solution to the political problems that are, as it were, to be found in the world, found, as it were, as though the world were always waiting to hand us the truth. So, this issue. So for even in this can be obfuscated by thinking in terms of the biological metaphor of evolution. So for instance, when we think of evolution, we think, there's no, like how Steven Pinker gets wrong the idea of a blank slate. So Steven Pinker thinks, yeah, we're born with certain proclivities or predilections, and just like in Noam Chomsky's example of the language, like if we get exposed to certain things, we're going to learn language. The body's already set up that way. The physical brain's set up that way. The neurons are set up that way, and so on. Okay, that's all perfectly fine. Socrates doesn't really care about that. That's just to say how it happens in the chain of the sort of commands coming out of the past, making the body the way it is, and so forth. But the point is the thing there, just as the eye, we need the eye to see not just the waves in the river, but to see the river itself, the so-called, this difference between the river as the hypokoumon, as the substance, and the river as the accidents. In the same way, Socrates would say, okay, so there's evolution, but that's not the origin of recognizing these things out of the past. The origin is that they're in what the Catholics call the actus purus, which is the stock of things which always are. So Heidegger says of the stock of things which always are, of truths which always are, which we can then recognize, let's say, supposing that this could even extend to the system of Montesquieu with regard to separation of powers, supposing we recognize that in the same way we recognize a mathematical formula. What Heidegger would say is this idea of what always is the sempiternal, and it's actually derivative on time. So we speak of the eternal, but we don't actually get to the eternal because we're thinking of a flow of time, which is always the unique flow of some given Dasein. And then we say, what if it kept flowing that way forever? It pertained in this way, perdured, as they say, forever. But it would just be the flow of time would be circulating in the same way, so the same thing would obtain again and again, the same way of thinking, that a chessboard would always be a chessboard because somebody would be there to know it as a chessboard and know its future to be used as a chessboard. But the same thing for the whole world and the whole outlay of the human order, of the political order, and of the outreach of the laws according to certain principles. As we're seeing, the principles of liberalism are still in play in Zizek's thinking. So let's encapsulate it there for a moment with the meditation pointing at this. The center of that meditation is on thinking of the recognition of a person and trying to think it not in terms of neurons, because it's true that you go to a certain place, you can destroy that place in the physical human brain, and then the neuron, and then the human being wouldn't recognize. I don't doubt that at all, but that's not the point of the what we're looking at, what we're trying to turn ourselves to. Remember that when we set ourselves to remember something, we don't really know how that happens because it's so simple. And in the same way, this example that I've often given about the cat that was monitored and then its family went away for 2 weeks, the cat suddenly jutted out 2 miles to the old house where it used to live in a straight line. How did the cat set itself to do that? How do we set ourselves to move? So there's things that are at a very basic level like this. If we can try to meditate over them, we might be able to unlock something but I'm trying to make it more tangible so we can see where we're moving in these ideas, where this research, but it's not, that's the problem with it. If it's merely a research project, which is already a prototype, then we lose the way we're supposed to be attempting to grip it out of this move, I guess, from Heidegger to Goethe in a way, to the magical atmosphere of Goethe. Goethe had these hallucinations. He could have waking, vivid hallucinations of flowers unfolding and things like this. And Jung, in one of his early papers, said this is one of the great problems with normatives: is you shut down all these doors which you regard as mentally ill or wrong, but the human being could go in these directions. So I'm not saying we should all go towards hallucination, but I'm saying there's certain ways of thinking that we're not using to their full piercing power.